Why is she still alive?
You can't know him.
Lois. He's my son. He's the hand of God.
You got us here to help you.
Help me? No.
The 2000s horror movies were on a whole different level. I cover lots of movies on this channel, but when I cover a movie that was released in the 2000s, there's always something special to talk about from this period. The 2000s were known for pushing the boundaries for gore. I believe movies like Saw 2004 and Hostel 2005 were the first ones to do it for this decade. The film that we will be covering today, called See No Evil, captures the brutality of the 2000s horror by embracing the era's obsession with excessive gore and violence. What got me into seeing See No Evil in the first place was because I recognized the main antagonist played by Kane, the wrestler. When I was young, I used to watch the WWE all the time, and I always saw Kane beating up other wrestlers, and the show was very entertaining. It was the era when Kane no longer had his mask that I grew up on. For my non-wrestling fans, let me give you a brief history of Kane. Kane was a professional wrestler portrayed by Glenn Jacobs, who made his WWE debut in 1997 as the Big Red Machine. He was introduced as the long-lost masked brother of The Undertaker, who was one of WWE's biggest stars around that time. Kane's backstory was that he survived a fire and burned down his family's funeral home when he was a child, and it was something that Undertaker was blamed for. This gave Kane a tragic, almost supernatural origin, making him one of WWE's most feared wrestlers. He always wore a black and red mask to cover his burning face, and he rarely spoke. In the WWE, he was portrayed as an unstoppable monster, destroying every opponent that got in his way. As the years went by, he evolved from a silent horror figure into a more complex character by removing his mask. Lots of fans who grew up watching him in the late 90s and early 2000s believed that him removing his mask was his downfall. I don't believe that. I think when he unmasked himself, the Big Red Machine was dead, but the Big Red Monster was born. Given Kane's horror movie-like persona in WWE, casting him as Jacob Goodnight in See No Evil 2006 made perfect sense. The movie basically brought his wrestling character into a slasher setting, with Kane's intimidating presence, brutal strength, and silent menace making him a natural fit for the role of a horror villain. Watching this movie again in 2025, I gotta say the film pretty much holds up today. While using CGI wasn't a new tool that movie studios used in the 2000s, See No Evil 2006 mostly relied on practical effects rather than CGI to make their movie look and feel real as possible. The obvious CGI part that was used in the movie was when Jacob was falling out of the window, but it still looked good. While watching the film back, I've noticed that it kinda actually did remind me of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974 film. With that rundown, filthy looking hotel, it gave me the same vibe as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Jacob Goodnight had the same presence as Leatherface. He was huge and hardly ever spoke. He didn't just kill people, but he viciously took out their eyes and puts them in a jar for his sick collection. See No Evil had that grimy, mean-spirited tone that makes the violence feel extra nasty. It had that 2000s gore, but you can definitely see that it got its influence by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it was modernized for its time. The cinematography and visual effects used in the film were outstanding. This is the type of 2000s magic I have been speaking about. If you add this with rock music, then you'll get a well-made horror film from the 2000s. See No Evil embraces out of this world visuals and stylized editing, such as flash cuts, shaky cam effects, which were very common around this time. Other movies that uses shaky cams and flashy cuts were Dead Silence and Saw. Unlike traditional slasher villains who simply stab or slash their victims, Jacob Goodnight added a sadistic, torturous element to his kills. He stalks his victims and also plans his movements, but then unleashes with brute force when attacking. His use of chains, hooks, and even taking out the victim's eyes while they're screaming at the top of their lungs aligns with the brute horror trend in the mid-2000s, making his brutality feel personal rather than random. Jacob was a silent killer who was driven by deep psychological trauma and twisted sense of morality. He was raised by an abusive, religiously fanatical mother. He was taught that sin must be punished at all costs, especially for those who indulge in doing wrong, like for example, substance abuse and drinking. His mother's brutal conditioning combined with years of mistreatment turned him into a violent, emotionally stunned man who saw himself as an enforcer of divine justice. He basically saw himself as the judge, jury, and executioner of people sent by God himself. He kills because he believes he's purging sinners, often targeting people who he perceives as immoral. His signature move? Well, it's definitely not a chokeslam. In here, it's basically taking the victim's eyes out. He learned this from his mother, that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and by removing them, he is cleansing his victims. A group of young delinquents were sent to clean up the Black Well Hotel as part of their community service. They had no idea that the building was the home to Jacob Goodnight. Since the young delinquents have committed crimes, it made perfect sense why Jacob would go after this group. As the group explores the Kane Hotel, they actually began to disappear one by one, falling victim to Jacob's brutal and merciless attacks. As the remaining survivors struggled to escape, they uncover the horrifying truth about Jacob's past and his twisted sense of justice. The film builds to a violent showdown where Jacob's reign of terror was finally brought to an end, at least until the second movie came out. Unlike the playful slashers of the 90s like Scream and Urban Legend, See No Evil is relentless in its brutality. There really wasn't much humor in this film, just pure, unforgiving horror. Maybe if you count the part when Jacob made Hannah swallow her own phone so it could stop ringing, but overall, it had a serious tone. The characters were mostly criminals and delinquents, and the movie didn't shy away from punishing them in merciless ways. See No Evil combined slasher elements with the ultra-violent, sadistic time of the 2000s horror. In many ways, the film stands as a prime example of how horror in this era moved away from a campy fun film and towards a more darker, sadistic vision of fear.